Join us as we dive into our obsession with true crime, history, and mysterious stories. Each Corrupted Clip episode is less than 30 minutes long, providing you with the perfect bite-sized content to get you through the day.
We assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this episode. The Corrupt Podcast is based on the facts and our opinions of the case. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Corrupt Podcast. The Santa Claus Bank Robbery occurred on December 23, 1927. Just days before Christmas, 4 men held up the First National Bank in Cisco, Texas. The robbery was a failure that led to, at the time, the largest manhunt in Texas history. Of the 4 men involved, 1 died during the robbery, 1 was sentenced to death in the electric chair, 1 was lynched, and 1 served time in prison before changing his ways.
Welcome to our 5 days of Corrupted Christmas. For Christmas, one of the best gifts you could give to us is to share our podcast. Share it to your socials, or tell a coworker and a friend.
Or even your grandma. She likes true crime. You know it. Trust me.
Absolutely. In the 1920s, Texas had a bank robbing epidemic. 2 or 3 banks were robbed every day. To counteract this, the Texas Bankers Association created the Dead Bank Robber Reward Program. This controversial program rolled out in 1926, and it offered a $5,000 reward for the killing of each bank robber. Today, this would be the equivalent of an $88,000 reward per robber. The reward money would only be paid out if the bank robber was killed, not injured. This led civilians to shooting to kill before questions were asked or a trial occurred. The $5,000 reward would have obviously been at the front of the community's mind when the First National Bank in Cisco was robbed the following year.
Man, it sure was a different time back then.
Shoot first, ask questions later.
The small town of Cisco, Texas, would be the center of the largest manhunt of the time. On December 23, 1927, Marshall Ratliff, Henry Helms, Robert Hill, and Lewis Davis held up the First National Bank.
Marshall Fields Ratliff was born on March 26, 1903. He married Maddie Bell in 1921, and they had 2 sons together, DeArmond Fields in 1922 and Dane Daniel in 1924. By 1927, Marshall was 24 years old and had a prior arrest with his brother Lee for robbing a bank in Valera, Texas. The brothers both served a year sentence before community members petitioned the governor for a pardon, and their mother, Ryla Carter, donated a large sum of money to sway the governor. Lee and Marshall were pardoned by the governor, but it wasn't long before they were back to their old ways. In fact, Lee was supposed to be part of the Cisco bank robbery, but he had already been arrested again.
Marshall had 2 ex-convict friends, Henry Helms and Robert Hill. Henry Helms was a 31-year-old Texas native. His occupation was listed as a rig builder, but he had been in jail in 1926 before being released on parole on January 10, 1927. Like Marshall, Henry had been pardoned by the governor for his crimes. Henry was married and had 6 kids at home. There isn't much known about 21-year-old Robert Hill. We know that he had a criminal record from at least burglary.
Marshall, Henry, and Robert planned the robbery from Wichita Falls, Texas, with a 4th man who specialized in cracking safes. At the last minute, this 4th man came down with the flu. Now, Henry and Robert saw the loss of their 4th comrade as a sign, and they wanted to delay the robbery. But Marshall was adamant that the robbery had to be on the final Friday before the Christmas holiday, as there would be the most money in the bank. Marshall thought the bank robbery would be a way to make some easy money. He estimated they would walk away with $10,000 each just to go into the bank, show their pistols, and have the tellers load the money into their bags.
This is how 32-year-old Lewis Davis was added to the robbery. Lewis was Henry's brother-in-law, and although he did not have a criminal background, he joined the robbery with the promise of $10,000 easy money. His one stipulation was no shooting in the robbery, But as we are about to discuss, that goes out the window pretty quickly. In the weeks before Christmas, Lewis had lost his job at the glass factory, where he had worked for 6 years. His participation in the robbery came from the need to support his family.
Lewis was married and had 3 kids at home to support, but Marshall at this point has 6 kids ranging from 11 to 1-year-old. Sometimes Lewis is spelled Louis, Louis. I did find his grave marker that confirms his name was spelled Lewis for Lewis. The 4 men stole a navy blue Buick in Wichita Falls and drove the 2 hours south to Cisco. Marshall had grown up in Cisco. Fearing that someone would recognize him, he disguised himself in a borrowed Santa Claus suit and was dropped off several blocks from the bank. Now this is where the robbery really starts to go awry. Imagine the delight when Santa Claus was dropped off and walking down the road on a Friday afternoon 2 days before Christmas. Children saw Marshall dressed as Santa and started to follow him, all the way to the alley beside the bank. Adults noticed that Santa didn't pass out candy or have a charity tin. In fact, this shady Santa only had a burlap Idaho potato bag. In the alley, Marshall met up with Henry, Robert, and Lewis. The other 3 pulled out pistols, entered the bank, and declared it was a holdup. Again, fearing that someone would recognize his voice, Marshall stayed silent. Several of the children, not realizing what was happening, followed Marshall into the bank.
Marshall forced a bank teller to open the vault and emptied out the teller drawers. Henry, Robert, and Lewis stole money from other employees and customers that were inside the bank. The men threatened to shoot anyone who resisted the robbery. 6-year-old Frances Blassingame saw Santa walking down the road and convinced her mother to take her into the bank to see Santa up close. Mrs. Blassingame and Frances walked into the bank from a side entrance and right into the robbery. The 4 men threatened to shoot, but both ladies escaped without harm from another exit in the bookkeeper's room. Mrs. Blassingame used her body to cover Frances until they made it outside. Once in the alleyway, Mrs. Blassingame began to scream for help. Citizens and Police Chief Bedford were notified of the robbery in progress, and chaos ensued.
The robbers attempted to leave the bank with their sacks of money, but found a crowd of people in the alley outside. Robert shot through a window and into the bank ceiling to show he was armed. Shots were returned immediately, as most of the citizens were armed as well. The robbers then forced the children, customers, and bank employees to walk out in front of them on their way to the getaway vehicle. The human shield resulted in several injuries to innocent people, including the bank president Alex Spears, who was shot in the jaw.
To top it off, the robbers kidnapped 2 small girls at gunpoint. Laverne Comer was 12 years old and Emma Mae Robertson was 10 years old. They had been at the bank that afternoon checking their saving account balances.
No parents around, in a time when 2 to 3 banks were being robbed a day. You would have thought people were a little more leery about going to the bank.
I would not have gone to a bank at that age by myself, let alone my mother let me by myself or with a friend, regardless.
No, but they were probably checking their account balances and maybe going to do some Christmas shopping. Still, why wasn't there a parent with them to go to the bank? Even now, you wouldn't send your kid to the bank, and bank robberies are way less common.
Must have been the 1920s. Everybody trusted everybody.
Yep, small town.
Laverne wasn't fooled by the Santa Claus suit. She recognized Marshall right away because her mother had purchased a cafe from Marshall's mother, and he still visited the cafe regularly.
Chief Bedford and Deputy George Carmichael were both fatally shot during the shootout. Robert leaned out the window to shoot Chief Bedford 5 times in the chest. Chief Bedford died several hours later, but Deputy Carmichael fought for his life until January 17th. Lewis Davis was also severely injured in the escape. 6 other townspeople were injured by gunshots as well. It is estimated there were 200 bullet holes in the bank building at the end of the shootout. It was obviously a half-thought-out plan, because after making it back to the car, the 4 men realized they were almost out of gas. Also, one of the tires had been shot out.
They drove to the edge of town before trying to steal an Oldsmobile from 14-year-old Woodrow Wilson Harris. Woodrow was driving his family when he saw Santa Claus parked on the side of the road and trying to flag him down.
The family was soon carjacked by Santa. Now that's a story you tell your grandkids.
And also 14? Seems pretty young.
It's the 1920s. That's what you just told me about the 12-year-old and 10-year-old going to the bank by themselves.
Yeah, you're right.
It's a dirt road. What harm can he do?
In an Oldsmobile. He ain't do much.
Thing's a boat. It's just steel. What's he going to do? Hit a cow?
Woodrow let them have the car, but threw the keys into the brush. Then his family ran for it. The robbers moved the money bags, 2 hostages, and an unconscious Lewis Davis into the new car. Finally realizing they couldn't start the car, Marshall, Robert, and Henry left Lewis in the Oldsmobile and loaded the hostages back into the Buick with the flat tire. In the back and forth, they left the money with their abandoned, unconscious conspirator, Lewis.
A mob found Lewis and the money in Woodrow's car and temporarily gave up on the chase because apparently they forgot about the kidnapped children.
Right. We got the money. Forget the kids.
I guess. $12,400 in cash and $150,000 in non-negotiable securities were returned to the bank. Lewis was taken to the Fort Worth Hospital, where he gained consciousness for a short time, but refused to give up the names of the other bandits. Lewis later died from his injuries, and his body was put on display in the hospital window.
His actual body was put on display where people can come by and see his dead body in a window at the hospital. He's dead, and they're watching him as they're going by and on display.
I believe it was used as an example. Don't be a bank robber. Look what happens to you.
Alrighty then, kids. This is what you become if you choose to be a bank robber. Don't do it.
It's not worth the $10,000, kids.
The 3 remaining robbers abandoned the car and the girls several miles from town, deciding to take off on foot. The girls were told to cover their eyes while Marshall removed the Santa costume. They didn't cover their eyes, and in addition to knowing Marshall from the cafe, both girls could both identify Marshall Ratliff later. The girls were not injured physically, but were taken to the hospital as a precaution. Meanwhile, the men stole another car and were able to avoid law enforcement until they wrecked the car near the town of Putnam, just 13 miles away from Cisco.
The robbers attacked a second driver, Carl Wiley, and held him hostage for 24 hours while forcing him to drive the car for them. Carl's father had been with him at the time of the kidnapping, and he was left behind when Carl was taken in their Dodge. The father shot at the vehicle in an attempt to strike one of the 3 men, but accidentally shot Carl in the arm instead. The robbers hadn't eaten in days. Marshall had been injured, and the road conditions were icy. They also had no money to buy supplies. Things were not going well for Marshall, Robert, and Henry.
The following day, they left Carl and his vehicle behind. They didn't get far before they were ambushed. A Texas Ranger, Cy Bradford, joined the manhunt. Cy stood in the field with 3 cartridges, convinced the men would be headed in his direction. Cy managed to shoot all 3 robbers with those 3 cartridges, and the chase ended with a shootout in the field. Marshall was struck and fell to the ground. Robert and Henry were both shot, but managed to escape into the woods.
The manhunt continued for Henry and Robert, with airplane assistance until the 2 walked into Graham, Texas, and were taken into custody without a fight. 2 more people were injured in the manhunt from accidental discharge of their own weapons. Excluding Marshall, Robert, and Henry's injuries, this brought the total to 2 murders, 8 wounded, 2 kidnapped children, and 1 of their friends dead.
Robert Hill pleaded guilty to armed robbery and took the stand on his own behalf to beg for mercy. He was sentenced to 99 years in prison for the events. Robert escaped from prison 3 times but was caught each time. On his 3rd and final escape, Robert left a note saying they could find him in Paris, France, but he only made it to Houston when he was caught. In the mid-1940s, after serving 20 years of his sentence, Robert was paroled. He possibly changed his name and got married. He died in 1996 at 90 years old.
Henry Helms was identified as the person who shot and killed Chief Bedford and Deputy Carmichael. He feigned insanity and refused to respond during the last months of his life. He struggled, kicked, and screamed on the walk to the electric chair Old Sparky. Henry was executed on September 6, 1929.
Marshall Ratliff was convicted of armed robbery on January 27, 1928. Just like Robert, Marshall was initially sentenced to 99 years in prison. Witnesses took the stand to describe Marshall as the group leader, and he was charged with the deaths of Chief Bedford and Deputy Carmichael, even when no witnesses saw Marshall actually shoot a gun. The murder charge came with the death penalty for Marshall on March 30, 1928.
Marshall appealed his charges, but after the appeal failed and Henry's execution, Marshall changed his tactic and declared himself insane and paralyzed. He spent months only mumbling and went completely limp. Now he was truly invested. When dropped by the guards to see if he would catch himself, Marshall just stayed limp and hit the floor hard. The guards also attempted to trick Marshall by leaving his body in a certain position, but when they returned in the morning, he hadn't moved at all.
Always the supportive parent, Marshall's mother also filed for a lunacy hearing in Huntsville. The community accused Marshall of lying and was upset about Marshall's attempt at an insanity plea. Judge Davenport had Marshall moved to the Eastland County Jail. Once at the Eastland County Jail, Marshall convinced his two jailers, Pack Kilborn and Tom Jones, that he was really insane, continuing to pretend to be paralyzed, and the two jailers had to assist with bathroom breaks and feeding Marshall.
On November 18th, Marshall attempted to escape the jail. Both jailers truly believed that Marshall was paralyzed, and they left his cell door open when feeding him. Marshall snuck to the sheriff's office where he stole a pistol. In the jailbreak attempt, Tom Jones was shot 3 times and killed, and Pack Kilborn fought Marshall off. During the fight, Pack put his pistol to Marshall's head. He pulled the trigger, but the gun was empty. Pack then hit Marshall with his gun, which dazed the man and allowed Pack to get him back into his cell.
The next day, a mob over 1,000 people arrived outside of the jail. The community was shocked by another attack by Marshall, and they wanted justice. Pack wouldn't allow the mob into the jail and was able to keep them out until the evening. At that time, the mob overpowered Pack and gained access to the jail. Marshall was dragged from his cell by the angry mob.
They stripped him naked, tied his hands and feet, and placed a sack over his head. A noose was wrapped around Marshall's neck, then a utility pole. The first drop was unsuccessful when the rope broke and Marshall fell to the ground. The mob started to chant, "String him up," and another rope was found. They did string him up, and just before his feet left the ground, Marshall's last words were, "Forgive me, boys." 26-year-old Marshall was declared dead on November 19, 1959 at 9:55 p.m. His body was on display for several hours until a justice of the peace ordered his body to be cut down. He was then put on display in a furniture store, while several thousand people viewed it before his family could arrive to take possession. Marshall was buried at the Mount Olivet Cemetery in Fort Worth.
Here we go again with the body being displayed, and this time at a furniture store. Out of all freaking places. An investigation was opened in regard to the lynching and the $5,000 per person reward. No one was charged with Marshall's lynching, but multiple people claimed to have shot Lewis. Because it was unable to be confirmed which shot was the one to kill Lewis, the $5,000 reward was never paid.
The First National Bank is still operational in Cisco, Texas, but they have moved locations. The new location draws tourists with a large painting of the robbery. A plaque was placed at the location of the original First National Bank. The plaque reads,
First National Bank, scene of daring Santa Claus Bank Robbery, December 23, 1927. During Christmas festivities, costumed Santa and 3 fellow bandits looted bank of $12,200 cash, $150,000 in securities. They escaped through gun battle with 2 little girls as hostages. A 3-day manhunt followed. The children and money were recovered. The robbers were captured. 6 persons were killed, 8 injured. Later, a mob lynched Santa when he broke out of jail.
We would love for you to become part of the Corrupt crew. You can find us on Patreon with multiple tiers and PayPal. This will score you our appreciation and will announce your name in a future episode. Both links are in the episode notes. Case suggestions and feedback can be emailed to us at corruptpod@gmail.com.
The sources for this episode would be listed in the episode notes. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads. Don't forget to subscribe to catch our new Corrupt content. Please also leave us a review wherever you're listening to this episode. Bye!
Bye!